All right. Hey, Community Church. I'm with such a good friend of mine, Rob Murray. Hi, Rob. How are you?
Hey, Troy, good to see you.
Yeah, you too. Rob is quite a guy. We've known each other for, I think it's been 20 plus years. We met in youth ministry in California. Rob's from South Africa originally, and he is working on his doctorate on transformational leadership. Has been a part of Westfall Speakers, Transformed Leader. Seems like you're starting things all the time. And what I know about you is you care about leaders, but you care about transformation in people.
Yeah.
And we have been talking about how do we move 6 feet closer to God and others. And we don't want to assume that it's a quick book read and a 1, 2, 3 fix and just stop feeling what you're feeling. What I love about your work, it has a lot to do with someone where they're at and what they're feeling. So we just talked about Matthew obviously leaving his role, following Jesus, and then reaching out to his friends. But can you help us, Rob? Let's just dialogue about what do we do in this season of quarantine and crazy feelings?
Yeah. Well, obviously, for many of us, we're in a season that is very, very strange, and we're all in it together, and we're all experiencing it in a different way. But we're all in this kind of collective experience, right? And so people are coming out sideways, people are blowing up, people are imploding, people are hiding, people are thriving. There's just a lot happening.
Yeah,
But the common denominator is the unknown, and unknown is scary. So none of us want to be in a situation in our lives where we don't know what's happening, and yet we've all been thrown into that.
yeah,
And so we are being given a front row seat into faith, into trust, into belief in a God who says he's good and who says he cares for us, who says he loves us. And I think it's becoming an incredible opportunity for us as people of faith to begin to see where we fall in our relationship with God. Not have we achieved it,
right.
but more a sense of of being curious. God, how am I doing in the midst of this storm? The
Mm,
storm is raging, and I have been called out onto the water. In fact, no, I wasn't called out. I was forced out of the boat, and now I'm standing on a rocky
yeah,
ocean. What now, God? Like,
yeah,
wow. So there's fear, there's unknown, there's anxiety, and our world is changing, whether you like it or not.
yeah. So are you suggesting then instead of, which I'm a person that always wants the fix, like tell me how to get out of this place.
Yeah.
Are you encouraging us to identify maybe more the starting place of where we're at?
Well, you're going to polarize. So what we typically do is in almost every area of our lives, think of breathing in and breathing out, right? Well, if I held that, I'd probably die. And if I breathed out and stopped, I'd die. Breathing is in and out. But typically in these situations, we like to go to the extreme. So I'm going to be a person of faith. Everything's going to be okay. Or I'm going to like, everything's going to burn.
Yeah,
And, uh, a- and, and our emotional, we're emotionally dysregulated right now. And we're all picking somewhere on the spectrum to freak out and it's all going to burn, or to have this kind of blind hope, faith, and trust that everything's going to be amazing. Well, everything's not amazing for everyone right now.
right,
So,
right.
so there's a tension that we're being called into. So I'm suggesting that you catch up to yourself a
Mhm.
little more. You catch up to what you know is happening and what you don't know what's happening, and you become more authentic about that with yourself and with God and with others.
Unpack that a little bit when you say catch up with yourself, because I think that's a phrase I've heard you talk about and we've talked about it. But help those listening today. What does that really mean? Catch up to yourself.
A real practice. Let's use one area of our being, feelings, right? That's just one area of who we are. Feelings, they're kind of this, as Chip Dodd would say, voice of the heart, or heart. Um, but the feelings are a tool to help us give language to the insides of our heart, the parts of that dimension of who we are. So catching up to yourself is knowing what you feel when you walk into a room. Catch up to yourself is knowing how you feel when you woke up today. And if you're not caught up to yourself, we all typically either overfunction or underfunction. If I don't know how afraid I am, I'm probably going to kind of just rise up and try to medicate,
Yeah.
try to pretend I'm not afraid, and I'll do a whole bunch of things, good or bad. But catching up to yourself is going, okay, God, like if you were to sit down and do a devotional and you immediately dive into the scripture and you start reading the scripture and you leave your devotional ready to charge the world, that's great. But what if you could sit there for a minute and posture yourself and say, God, I'm afraid? Like, would that be a more authentic statement?
Yeah.
I think it would be. I don't think God's afraid of your fear. I don't think God's worried that you have feelings. I think he's like, oh gosh, finally they're living the way I designed them to live,
Yeah.
which is humans who have feelings, thoughts, dreams, desires, and hopes. And I sit there in front of the presence of God and I go, God, I'm afraid. Well, fear is now this is an invitation to what? Well, when you're afraid, what do you need? You need refuge and protection, and you need
Mm.
presence. Okay, acknowledging the fact that I was afraid just invited God and his presence to become a refuge for my fear in the midst of
Wow.
my challenge.
Which, if I could illustrate then, so for me, if I quickly go to, well, I'm just going to read some scripture and then teach those to everybody, and we're just going to claim that, but I've not acknowledged, gosh, you know what? There's some fear I have of, could our church fail in this season?
Yeah,
Could I fail as a leader?
yeah,
I might fail as a leader. I may not
yeah,
make the right decisions. Gosh, God, I need you in this. And so, yeah, that truth about you is still there, but I'm not ignoring where I'm at. So I'm honest, I'm fearful, and
yeah,
I want to trust you in the midst of my fear.
yeah. Think about Jesus, right? This is such a I try to understand the scripture and try to imagine what it was like right before the cross in the Garden of Gethsemane. What does he say to God? Is there another way?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm.
So you've got God incarnate communicating to his father in what I would say is the most human display of how we were designed. God, is there another way?
He's caught up to
Like,
himself.
oh, he's caught up to himself. And guess what? There's some real feelings there, and he's bringing them to God. And there is a moment where his will meets God's will, and all of us have these moments in our lives. And what happens? God says, no, this is the way.
Yeah.
So there is this transcending obedience, but it's not outside of a relationship. It's not outside of a communion with God. And that's what Jesus had in the garden. He had communion with his Father, and it was an authentic, deep, true communion. And so the question is, how do we become more human as Christians to
Yeah.
tell the truth about what it feels like to be us?
Yeah. So what would be some of the feelings that we should be honest about in this season, you think, as you're watching our world?
So I would say we all need to get really good at grief. Okay, so grief is more of a process, but grief comes from loss. And it's impossible not to acknowledge the fact that we have all lost several things.
Mm.
Well, grief and loss comes because you know how to be sad. So sadness is a feeling.
Wow.
So if you don't realize how sad you are right now, well, no, we're fine. We're going to be fine. Okay, well, that's you trying to avoid sadness because we don't want to be sad. We all want to be happy. Well,
Right.
happy is not the opposite of sadness. Happy is more of essential form of gladness. But if you think of what gladness is, deep gladness can only be experienced if you're willing to be sad.
Yeah.
And then sadness takes us through this grieving process. Man, I'm really sad right now. Fear is an easy one. Anxiety is tied to fear. Oh,
Yeah.
I'm really anxious. Okay, you're just really afraid. Okay, like really, really afraid.
Right. Right.
I keep raging. Okay, you're really, really, really afraid. So you've got fear, you've got sadness from the loss that we're experiencing. Some people are angry. The world is not functioning the way it should. Your efforts to find that new job or to keep your job, it's failed. So there's anger and fear and loss and sadness. I mean, we are being pulled into a world of feelings right now.
Right. Right. Well, Rob, I know you have a podcast called Talk of Change, which is so great. And I don't mean that just to prop it up to get you to watch it, church, but I'll tell you, it just deals with a lot of these types of conversations and topics. And so that's a great resource we'll list. But I know you've just produced something else that you threw at me and just your desire to help other people. Could you talk about that resource?
Yeah. So real quick, so much of what's going on around you right now online on the news is information. Now, information's helpful. I can help you. I can tell you you're fine. You're going to be okay. But it's another thing to have an experience in your heart and your soul. So I created a resource not to make you smarter, not to tell you statistics, but I created it to give you an experience with yourself and God, so that you could process both your fears and your faith. Okay. When David went out to face Goliath, he wasn't like, yeah, I got this. I mean, there was a part of him that had a belief that God would do what God said he would do, and God was going to use him.
Right.
But David went out courageous, not fearless. Because
Mm.
I know when he stepped out onto that battlefield, it wasn't like, man, I don't have any fear right now. I'm just feeling like super confident. He had to process the fact that he was human, and he had to process the fact that he had a faith in a God far greater than him. This resource that I created, it just takes you through a journey to process the fears and the insides of who you are,
Mm.
and to say them out loud. It's one thing to circle them in your head. It's another thing to say them out loud to another human being or to God.
Good.
Then it takes you through the other side, which says, what do you wish will happen? What do you hope will happen? What do you believe could happen? And it's around a challenge that you're facing because of this current crisis. So what I've done right now is I've taken you out of the 68 to 72 degrees that your house is set, the safe temperature, and I took you maybe down to the 50s and 40s, or probably 20s or 10s in Wisconsin. I don't know how cold it gets out there, but it's pulling you a little further along the spectrum into the shadows and the insides of who you are, so God can see them, but more you can see them with God.
Yeah.
And then I take you all the way over here, and I go, okay, let's turn the heat up. What do you hope that God's going to do?
Yeah.
Now I'm bringing more of who I am, and I can then integrate those and become more courageous.
Yeah.
And I can say, all right, God, I am afraid, but I trust you.
Yeah.
All right, God, I hope this is going to happen. And I believe that you could do this. But if you don't, remember Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? They were like, man, we don't know if we're going to live or die. And I'm sure they were afraid, but there was a sense of courageousness that came out of them, which was, but God, we trust you
Right.
that we are yours.
Yeah.
And so this exercise just helps people process their fear and their faith, and hopefully, allows them to make some courageous next steps.
Really helpful. Rob, thanks so much. Love.
Oh, you're so welcome.
And I know our church community benefited from when you've been up with us, and I'm sure after this lifts, this will be good. But church, you have some good quarantine content and some things to think about with Rob. So blessings to you guys. And so thanks, Rob.
Oh, thank you, Troy.
All right, take care.